Hello, my CFA friends, and welcome to the wonderful world of economics with Martin Stoyanov. Yep, that's me. So, what can I tell you about myself? I joined Kaplan in Feb of 2007, just before the GFC or the global financial crisis, the great financial crisis. So good market timing on my part to join just before all chaos broke loose. Previous to that, I was a corporate financier based in Rome, Italy for a few years. Very, very nice and sunny place. But I am currently based in London, United Kingdom. And I currently specialize, obviously, in teaching CFA Level 1, which is what we are doing today. But I also teach Level 2, so you may see me on some Level 2 videos. I also teach the FRM, which is the Financial Risk Manager certification. And I also used to teach Kaya, which is the alternative investments, but that's a little bit too much teaching. So I currently only specialize in CFA and FRM. So let's go over a few basics here, housekeeping rules. Now, these are, of course, our master classes, so they only look at the critical points, the key points of the syllabus for the uber academically curious among yourselves who want to know everything, every single line. We also have our module videos, which of course cover all learning outcome statements. Now, also these slide decks do have fully worked out solutions at the back if you want to check them out. Now, because I handwrite everything, my solutions here may differ from those, but of course we arrive at the exact same answer. Right, so I think that's a pretty nice short intro here, guys. I would say, do you have any questions? But of course, these are recorded videos, so if you do have any questions, then just shoot us an instructor link email. And now I believe we are ready to start. There you go. We are in our, as I said, wonderful world of economics. And here you can see my lovely little stick man waving at you. Okay, the first point that we are going to be focusing on here is firm and market structures. So we're going to be looking at competitive structures. We're going to be looking at some key definitions such as variable costs, fixed costs, and so on and so forth. So hopefully it's going to be a nice and exciting journey for us. Okay, before we get started with the nitty-gritty, let's look at the focal points here that we need to be paying attention to. We're going to look at shutdown decisions. So depending on the price we can charge, we may want to operate or shut down in the short or long run. We're going to look at economies of scale, which is basically the idea that we don't want to be a very small company, but we also don't want to be a very big company. We want to find the optimal size, the sweet spot where we've minimized our average total cost. We're going to look at competitive structures. So the two fairly competitive structures are perfect in monopolistic competition. They do have a few differences, but are pretty competitive structures. And on the other end of the spectrum will, of course, be oligopoly and monopoly, which are not very competitive at all. And the pudding after the meal will be concentration measures, which will introduce us to a couple of metrics which can tell us whether the industry is fragmented or competitive. Okay, so there's our first slide. This is going to be break-even versus shutdown decision. And before we start, I probably want to go over the acronym so everyone is on the same page. So this is my marginal cost, or the additional cost from having an additional unit produced. So as you can see, that's kind of skyrocketing here in our diagram. It's pretty exponential. Here we've got our average total and average variable costs. And of course, it pays dividends to know that total costs are variable costs plus fixed costs. So remember, variable costs are things like cost of goods sold, whereas fixed costs will be things like your salaries, maybe rents, which don't vary with the amount of units that we are producing. Okay, also mathematically here, you can see that the marginal cost curve hits the AVC and the ADC at their minimum points. Pretty important, if you ask me, to spot that. It's going to become more important in the coming slides. So let's take as an example point P2. Let's say that was $10. And notice this is the minimum of our average variable cost. Now, suppose I had a product that I could sell for $8, but I could only buy it from my supplier at $10. Now, that won't be a very good business model, right? Buy something at 10, sell it at 8. Well, let me think about that. I probably don't want to operate this business for very long. In other words, I will probably shut it down. Something like yesterday, shut down in the short run. And obviously, I won't operate that business in the long run either. Now, if on the other hand, let's say P1 was $15, so that represents the minimum of the ADC curve, and I was able maybe to sell the product at 12. Now, remember, I'm buying it at 10, selling it at 12. Now I'm covering all of my variable costs, okay, and I have a leftover of $2. That is a contribution towards my fixed costs. Now, things have changed. Things have changed because I'm covering my variable costs. I can afford to operate in the short run, but because I'm not yet able to cover all my costs, so I can't really, pay your salaries or my rent, even though I can operate in the short run while you're waiting for me to become successful. If I don't become successful, I'm gonna have to shut this thing down in the long run. Okay, now if I was indeed charging $15, at that point, my price would be the minimum of the ADC, which is basically the most efficient structure that we can have here. Quick spoiler alert, if I may, that'll be perfect competition, right? Price being the minimum ADC will be perfect competition. But more importantly here, I will operate in the long run because now you can see that I am breaking even. So I want to operate in the long run, and this will actually be referred to as normal profit. Okay, so I've got normal profit here. If my price, however, was above the minimum of the ADC, then not only am I breaking even, but what is happening now? But I'm now having even profit, and this profit is known as economic profit, right? And whenever you have economic profit, you're going to want to attract competition. And when competition gets attracted, we have to look at whether you have barriers to entry. If you have barriers to entry, if you have a moat, okay? If you have a moat, then they're not going to come in, okay, and eat your economic profit away. If, however, you don't have barriers to entry, they are gonna come in and eat your profit away, at which point you will converge back to normal profit. Okay, that's basically how it's gonna work. All right, so very, very important. I would say, if needs be, just listen to this one more time, because this sets the scene for a lot of other things. Okay, so we're gonna have examples in the slides. As you can see, I've blanked them out because what I want to do is I want you to try them. Okay, I don't want I to try them. I want you to try them because you are the learner. So you know what you gotta do. Pause the video and try the problems. Okay, and then unpause the video and see how a tutor solves them. Okay, that's very, very important. So I'm not going to say this all the time, pause the video and pause the video. Just, you know that you got to do that. All right. So a company has revenues of £2 million, okay, Great British pounds, total fixed costs of £1 million and total variable costs of £1.5 million. The net loss on the firm's income statement is reported as £500,000. What decision should the company make regarding operations over the short and long term? Okay, so I'm guessing at some point here you paused the video, so you had a good thought about that. And we are going to start looking at this problem. Okay, so my revenues are 2 million. All right, I'm going to put that there. What else do I have? I've got variable costs, so I'm going to put that here. And of course, 2 million minus my variable costs. So my sales minus my cost of goods sold is going to give me 0.5 million. And I'm calling this a contribution because I am contributing towards my fixed costs. Okay, now how big are my fixed costs in this problem? They're 1 million pounds. So therefore, I have a loss, 0.5 minus 1. I have a loss of half a million pounds. £500,000. Okay, so I need to think here in terms of my decisions. What should I do in the short run? Well, let me think about this. Okay, what do I know here? I've covered all my variable costs and I've been left with some profit after variable costs. So that's good news for the short run, right? I want to operate in the short run because I've covered all my variable costs and I'm making a contribution towards my fixed cost. So I will say, all right, short run, let's operate. We like that. We like that. Now, long run, what can I do in the long run? Well, in the long run, if the situation persists, you can see that the contribution is not enough to meet your fixed costs. You still have a loss. So in the long run, shut it down. Okay, so that's basically, if you gave an answer along those lines, you basically got a point. Right, okay, so the other concept that I mentioned that I wanted to talk about was economies and diseconomies of scale. So here the main thing is that you're going to be seeing this long run average total cost curve. And as a minor point, you can think of this as being constructed by looking at a multitude of short-run average total cost curves. Okay, but that's not too important. The important thing is the shape. So starting at the left with very, very low quantity, we have high costs, then it drops, and then it increases again. Now, what does that mean? Well, suppose we take someone like Elon Musk, right, making Teslas, you know, and high-tech cars, self-driving cars, great cars, electric cars. Now, he's obviously going to put in a lot of research and development, a lot of money in the business. So imagine how expensive a factory to make it Teslas is, right? And then you put all this money, You got this fantastic high-tech factory, but all you produce is just one Tesla, one single Tesla. Now imagine what is the average cost of that Tesla. It's pretty high, right? It's not very efficient. Okay, what you want to do is once you've invested, you want to scale up. You want to produce as many Teslas as possible. That's going to bring the average cost down. Okay, that's good up to a point. That's good up to a point. So the sort of range where we observe a downward sloping ADC is known as the economies of scale. So the costs are dropping. You've got some examples of why this might happen. So labor specialization. So your labor, obviously, I like to use the analogy of a building project, right? I've got a lot of building projects in my house recently, so I can speak about that. So if only a single builder comes to the site, well, he kind of has to do everything. It's not very efficient, right? And I mean, okay, he might have to build foundations, he might have to lay bricks, not to mention that these are completely different skill sets. So if I bring multiple builders and specialists, one can look after the electrics, another one can look after the plumbing, yet another one can be actually, building the walls. So labor specialization is really, really good. Discounts on inputs, obviously, you want to be sufficiently big so that your suppliers will offer you discounts to raw materials. And that's great. And that's going to allow you to reach the minimum of the ADC. And that is your sweet spot. That is your sweet spot. Okay. Now, if, however, you get too big, then the opposite starts to happen. Now what you've got is you've got these economies of scale. So your ADC starts rising as you increase quantity. Now, why is that going to happen? Well, the obvious one is rising input costs. If you are very, very big, you are bidding the price of raw materials up. Also, it may happen because your company has gotten so big that it's very hard to manage, aka it becomes bureaucratic or red tape-ish, right? Lots of different departments. Some people don't know what to do, or some activities overlap. Okay, now let's look at the actual market structures here. So you got 4 flavors in this reading, so to speak. You got perfect competition, monopolistic, oligopoly, and monopoly. Okay, so Martin has this approach here. Take a pen and simply draw a line here. Okay, basically create 2 buckets. Okay, bucket number 1 on the left is your competitive structures. Bucket number 2 on the right is your concentrated structures. Okay, so if you're a consumer, you wanna be basically buying from the guys on the left. But if you wanna be a businessman, you wanna own a company on the right. Okay, so we are gonna be going through all these structures in great detail, but just as a bird's eye view here, perfect and monopolistic, we've got lots of companies, lots of tiny companies with not a lot of bargaining power, right? Barriers to entry are low, so that means that if there is, food at the table, people are just going to come in, the door is unlocked, people from the street are going to come in and help themselves. Okay, well, we've got substitutes, right? So it's not a unique product that is protected by patents or things like this. It's pretty easy to substitute. Nature of competition, there is a little bit of differentiation there. I'll explain that in great detail later, and so on and so forth for bucket number 1. For bucket number 2, oligopoly means we've got few players, okay, not many, but few players. Monopoly, obviously, one player, single player. So that's a theoretical structure, much like perfect competition is theoretical structure. But the key point here is that these guys have high barriers to entry. So back to the analogy of your front door, the front door is now locked. So even though there's food at the table, people from the street cannot come in and help themselves. Okay, what else here? I think that's the main thing. I don't want to go in too much detail on this slide because obviously we're going to be looking at each structure individually. Okay, all right, so we're going to start with perfect competition. So perfect competition, we are a price taker. Now, this is really, really important, okay? So what is a price taker? And so here you also see a very important word, perfectly elastic. So in economics, when you got a curve that's perfectly elastic, it's a horizontal line, my friends. It's a horizontal line. Much like a perfectly inelastic curve is a vertical line. Okay? Now, here, remember, what are the axes? So here you've got price, and here you've got quantity. So if you've got perfectly elastic curve, that means you can expand the quantity or you can reduce the quantity, but you're not going to change the price because you are a price taker. Price is exogenous. Price is given to you by the market. You are just a little tiny, tiny ant in the hive, right? Tiny little player, and you just get that price given to you by the market, by the forces of supply and demand in the market. Okay, so what are the characteristics? We've got a homogeneous product. Homogeneous means it's a commodity. Okay, so imagine if we all sold the same product. Let's say we all just wanted to sell unbranded bags of sugar. Okay, unbranded bags of sugar. Homogeneous product. Obviously, we're not be able to charge higher price because there's absolutely zero differentiation in this whole thing. Okay, we've got a lot of players, they're independent, so there is no collusion, there's no game theory, there's no thinking about what other players are gonna do, it's just all independent, no barriers to entry, so if there's any economic profit, others can come in and eat it away, and so on and so forth. But I think the key takeaway here is we are going to be a price taker. Now, we come to the slightly more technical slide. Obviously here, if you dislike diagrams, if you have phobia, diagram phobia, you might be a little bit scared when you're looking at this. Please, please, please do not be scared. There's nothing scary here. I'm going to give you the words, my friends. And if you know the words, you are going to be getting points. Okay, so you don't need to draw any diagrams. You don't need to calculate any areas under the curve, anything like that. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to notice here is that we have a horizontal price curve because we are a price taker, right? Perfectly elastic demand curve. This is essentially your demand curve, being a price taker. And your demand curve is also your marginal revenue. So remember, in economics, marginal revenue simply means how much more revenue will I get when I sell the next unit. But that's also the average revenue, which is the revenue, total revenue divided by the quantity sold. So if you're selling every unit at the same price, which is your marginal revenue, then your average revenue will also be equal to your marginal revenue. I know it sounds more complex than it is, but it really is that simple. So basically, Look, I previously told you also that the marginal cost crosses the ADC at its minimum point. So that's very, very important. So we are at the min ADC, and you can see that the price is actually equal to the minimum of the average total cost curve. So actually, this is our most efficient structure, my friends, the most efficient structure. So from a consumer point of view, it cannot get any better. This is the lowest price a consumer can ever hope to pay. It is a theoretical structure. Okay, it is a theoretical structure. Okay, another thing here that is really, really important that you have to remember is the profit maximization point. Do you know where you're going to be to profit maximize? Remember, this structures is not about revenue maximization, it's about profit maximization. So you want to be at the point where your marginal revenue exactly offsets your marginal cost. Okay, so obviously, because this is our marginal cost curve, and this here, the horizontal line is a marginal revenue curve, well, they kind of crossed here, and that determined Q star being the optimal quantity that we should be selling. But at what price are we going to be selling it? Then we go up to the price or to the demand curve, and we discover that that's the price at which we're selling. Now, because price is equal to ADC, or better, equal to min ADC, what kind of profit are we making, my friends? What kind of profit are we making? Yes, you guessed it, is going to be normal profit. Okay, very, very good. So this, very important, you need to remember, this is true in the long run, okay? Once the dust settles, you go be making normal profit, because remember, the front door is unlocked, so they're coming in, okay? They're coming in to eat your food. If the situation was the short run, okay, then potentially, yes, you can have economic profit because of short-term movements in price, okay? So price could be temporarily too high, price could be temporarily too low. So you could have economic profit or loss in the short run, but not in the long run. Please remember this, not in the long run. Okay, well, okay, you know what you gotta do here, my friends, but we are gonna do a question. Okay, an agricultural firm operating in a perfectly competitive market supplies wheat to manufacturers. So I already spot that this is quite important. Manufacturers of consumer food products and animal feeds, if the firm were able to expand its production and unit sales by 10%, the most likely result would be, the question is about revenues. Is it going to be 10% rise in total revenue, 10% increase in average revenue, or less than 10% increase in total revenue? Well, I already know it's not going to be B. It's not going to be B, because if I go back here, I can see that my average revenue is just a nice horizontal flat line. So you can be increasing quantities, but you're not going to be increasing price. And obviously, you're not going to be increasing average revenue. So it's going to be something to do with total revenue. Now, do I remember my formula for total revenue, my friends? So total revenue is price times quantity. And what I'm told here is that unit sales have gone up by 10%. So this number here has gone up by 10%. But we know that price can't have changed, right? Because price is perfectly elastic. We are a price taker. Well, the mathematicians in the virtual room here will immediately tell you if price is changing by 0%, but quantity is going up by 10%, then total revenues should also go up by 10%, not less than 10%, should be 10%. Boom, right? Knock it out, guys. It's not a difficult question. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. Give it a try. Okay, example 2 here. Again, I'm not gonna say it. The marginal revenue per unit sold for a firm doing business under perfect competition, so quite important hint here, will most likely be. So, okay, remember we're talking about the marginal revenue. So is it going to be equal to the average revenue, less than the average revenue, or greater than the average revenue? So it's basically the relationship between MR and AR. Well, guys, if we followed this slide, the question becomes a dead obvious. We are a price taker. Excuse the repetition here. We are price taker. The price is perfectly elastic. I can sell more units, but it's always going to be at the same price. Marginal revenue is constant, and so is average revenue. So I will, without the shadow of any doubt, my friends, I would select A or alpha for this question. Okay, right, marginal revenue in imperfect competition. So this is basically a code name now for monopolistic competition. So we've done perfect, now we're entering the world of monopolistic competition. Now, what's going to happen here? The first thing that strikes you here, is that your demand curve is no longer flat horizontal. So you're no longer a price taker. You are now a price setter. You set the price, my friends. Ain't that good? You setting the price. Okay, so you've got a downward sloping demand curve. This essentially means you can sell less and charge more, or you can sell more and charge less. The reason why this is going to happen here is because we're going to be, spoiler alert, we're going to be selling a differentiated product, not a homogeneous one. Okay, it's going to be a differentiated, so we can try to differentiate ourselves. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. For now, we know that we are focusing on this downward sloping demand curve, but the key point is that no longer do the demand curve, which is the average revenue curve, so this is still the average revenue curve, but no longer does the average revenue curve coincide with the marginal revenue curve. Notice that the MR curve is now effectively twice as steep, going down at twice as steep the rate, if you like. And I want to explain why this happens. Now, suppose that our imperfect competitor here was selling 3 units, right? 3 units, go and read how much price he could charge. He is charged $60. So he's selling 3 units at $60. He is making $180 in total rev. Okay? Now, suppose he says, but I want to sell 4 units. I don't want to sell 3 units. I want to sell 4 units. Now, the problem here is that if you want to sell 4 units without price discrimination, so there is also the issue of price discrimination, but let's not open that Pandora's box today. If I want to sell 4 units, I need to lower the price on all of them, including the 3 units I was planning to sell at 60. Okay, so if I wanted to sell 4 units, I'll actually have to lower the price to $50. So now I'm selling 4 units at $50. Yes, my total rev has gone up from 180 to 200, but the additional revenue, my friends, the additional revenue is only $20. And yes, you get the additional revenue is known as the marginal revenue. So notice how even though the average revenue of the fourth unit was $50, the marginal revenue of the fourth unit was only 20. So that kind of explains there why we've got that steep drop in the marginal revenue. Now, this is going to be important in the coming slides when we analyze the various diagrams and the intersection and the profit maximization quantities and all that good stuff, my friends. Okay, so monopolistic competition. So this is our second structure. Obviously, we still have a large number of independent players. Okay, so that's kind of similar to perfect. But here's the key difference. Instead of a homogeneous commoditized product, we now have a differentiated product. Okay, so that's kind of basically similar products, but they are also slightly different because of maybe brand names. Okay, so if we take things like trainers, you could talk about Nike, Adidas, Puma, Asics, Reebok, you name it, right? You can go and shop around. And yes, they're all trainers, they all do the job, but they have different brands. Okay, so maybe you might say, oh, one of these brands is better for jogging, another one's better for tennis. I don't know. You might have some. Yet another one is just very, very trendy. It looks cool. So you've got your preconceptions, is what I'm saying. So obviously, these guys, I mean, it's all basically trainers, but these guys can use some differentiation to charge different prices. So they have some pricing power, but there are low barriers to entry again. So it's not going to result in massive economic profit. Maybe some in the short run, but not in the long run. Okay, so there you go. I just said it. It's very, very important for you to distinguish between short run and long run in economics. So in the short run, you may have some economic profit. That is the gray rectangle here. But in the long run, the gray rectangle disappears and you only have normal profit. Now, again, there's lots and lots going on in these curves, this diagram, so don't panic. I'll give you the good stuff right now here. So remember, the profit maximization point is always where MR meets MC. So that determines the profit maximization quantity. We then read off the actual price we can charge from the demand curve, and we read your ATC from the, obviously, ATC curve, and that's how we determine that price being greater than ATC. Then we are going to make some economic profit, which is calculated for the mathematicians as price minus ATC, open close bracket, times Q. Okay, that's basically your economic profit. Okay, now, more interestingly, what happens in the long term, right? So there was this economic profit. New competition comes in. As new competitors come in, they push the price down. So imagine here the demand curve being pushed down a little bit. So this kind of gets pushed down and going, what's that, southwest direction. And eventually it becomes kind of equal to the ADC. So they become tangent. The demand curve becomes tangent to the ADC. So price is equal to ADC, which means that we are only making normal profit. We're only making normal profit. But I want to also observe something very, very subtle here that often gets overlooked. You know, you might be thinking, well, isn't that the same conclusion as perfect? they both resulted in normal profit in the long run. Okay, you might want to pause the video here and think, is it exactly the same? Or is there a slight difference? What you guys think? The answer is there is a slight difference, my friends, because even though here we still got normal profit, can you see that we are actually above the minimum of the ADC? Because your minimum of the ADC is here, where MC crosses ADC, and you are above it. So it means that this branding, this advertising came at a cost, okay? There's no free lunch. The brands came at a cost. So even though it is an efficient structure from an economic perspective, it is a tad less efficient than perfect competition because of that differentiation that players are engaging in. Okay, we've got a question here. So a company doing business in a monopolistic competitive market will most likely maximize profits when its output quantity is set such that. Okay, so what's the key word here? I think it's maximize profit. Okay, so let's see the options. I want to maximize my profits. It's probably going to be a pretty obvious question, but let's just go over the options. Average cost is minimized. So are we at the min of the ADC? In perfect competition, we would have been. But here in this case, we are, let's say, at point alpha, whereas they are talking about point bravo. Okay, so average cost is not minimized. Is marginal revenue equal to average cost? Is marginal revenue equal to average cost? Okay, so let's go to the diagram again here. So marginal revenue is this downward sloping line, let's say, and average cost is of course the ADC. Well, I can't even see any intersection, my friends, so that's pretty made up. Is marginal revenue equal to marginal cost? Of course, my friends. The profit maximization point for many of the structures is MR equals MC. So we are quite happy to circle this and to move on to the next challenge. Okay, third structure. Now we're getting into the second bucket. Okay, so the structures that are less competitive. Here you can see we've got small number of sellers. In fact, if we only have exactly 2 number of sellers, that's known as a duopoly. So, okay, let's say Boeing and Airbus, right? So, I mean, I'm not saying they're the only ones, but these are the big names, right, for commercial. So, Boeing versus Airbus. Now, okay, so they are not price takers. They're going to have downward sloping demand curves. So again, they can play with quantities and prices. But here comes the big word, interdependence. So they're not going to take, they're not going to make decisions on their own, completely ignoring the other competitors. So here we're going to be thinking about game theory. We're going to be thinking about what moves, what actions our competitors are going to take. Of course, you've got substantial pricing power because there are not a lot of other players, and also maybe your product is not easily replicable, and also because you've got significant barriers to entry. Okay, and also the funky word collusion crops up here. Collusion occurs when the oligopolists are able to agree to keep quantities deliberately low and price deliberately high. Okay, so if they formed something like a cartel. Okay. Now you've got pricing models, and you can see here Kink-Demand, Cournot model, Stackelberg, Nash equilibrium. It can sound pretty scary at the beginning because you're thinking, wow, oh, there's all these models to memorize. But really, honestly, my friends, I would say it's pretty straightforward. I'm gonna give you the main stuff here, the salient points, and you'll be absolutely fine. So for the Kink-Demand curve, basically, if you kind of want to start by thinking what it is, you've got the demand curve that is shaped like that. Okay, so that's called a kinked demand curve. And your current price is here. Let's call that P0. And then here, that's Q0. Okay. So what you're going to find is that above P0, we've got a relatively elastic demand curve. So remember, horizontal is perfectly elastic. Vertical is perfectly inelastic. So something that's pretty shallow and not steep is considered elastic, and something that's very, very steep is considered inelastic. So here I've got elastic demand above price, above current price, inelastic demand below current price. And why does that happen? Well, it happens because if one of the competitors increases his price, okay, if one of the competitors increases his price, what are the rest of them going to do? Are they going to increase their prices, or what are they going to do? Think about it. If you were the players, what would you do, my friends? What would you do? Well, the answer is you're not going to increase your price, okay? So let that player shoot himself in the foot, so to speak, because by increasing his price, he's essentially saying, okay, well, go to my competitors because they're not going to increase the price. So that very, very elastic curve would indicate that, let's say, for a 10% price increase, he's going to lose more than 10% in quantity sold. So the curve is very elastic. If you were going to increase price, it's going to be a bad deal for you because your competitors are not going to follow you. Okay. Now, what if I reduce my price, my friends? What's going to happen if I reduced my price? Well, now essentially I'm going to be starting a price war. So this is the opposite of collusion, right? The opposite of having a cartel, the opposite of having an agreement. Now, one of the oligopolies is starting a price war. And for the rest of them to stay in business and not to be basically priced out, they also need to lower their prices. But think about what happens if we all lowered our prices. If we all lowered our prices, the winner from all that would be the end customer. So basically, they'll just end up paying a lower price. None of us will gain any significant new market share, and hence the relatively inelastic demand curve on the downside, meaning that I could reduce my price by 10%, but that's not going to result in a gain of quantity of 10%. It would result in a less than 10% gain in new quantity. So that's my kinked demand curve. Cournot model. Okay, here, guys, I am going to use the analogy of a chess game. So in chess, I mean, you don't need to be a chess player to understand this analogy. As long as you know that white is the first to move and black is the second to move, that's more or less enough to understand the analogy. So in a normal chess game, white plays first, black plays second. But if we were to play a chess game using the Cournot model, they will both be allowed to move at the same time. So if any of you play chess, you know that this is gonna be total chaos, because we will be making moves without knowing what our competitor will do to us, right? So there'll be essentially no threat of retaliation, if you like. We will simply be making moves without being able to consider our opponent's move. And Cournot ran that model, and because both players were essentially identical, he ran it via duopoly. He discovered that after 20 moves, let's say, the players split the market equally, right? So you basically focus on the conclusion. If both players are making their moves at the same time, they are going to end up with a draw, okay? They will split the market equally. Now here comes the Stackelberg model though, and the Stackelberg, he says no. White makes the first move, then black makes the second move, okay? And if you play chess, you know that basically that gives a slight edge to white. So the first mover advantage, or the leader firm, essentially is supposed to win this game, or supposed to capture a larger portion of the market. Again, obviously retaliation occurs here in the sense that we know what the other player has moved, so we can obviously take an action to try and counteract their last move. And then you've got Nash equilibrium. This is where the companies sort of, again, if we're looking at the chess analogy, I'm going to run through, all the possible moves that my opponent can make, 20 odd moves. And for each of those moves, I will evaluate what the best thing I can do is, right? And obviously I'm going to make the most optimal move given what the options are for the other player. And obviously the other player will do the same thing vis-a-vis me. And eventually we shall reach a position where no player can make any changes to the board. No player can make any further moves because they have reached what's known as basically a Nash equilibrium position, an optimal position where they've maximized their payouts. Okay, the fourth in last structure is the monopoly. Okay, monopoly is a single player. Okay, you've got a unique product. So, yeah, I mean, it's a theoretical situation, my friends, but obviously it is the most lucrative situation from the point of view of the business, and the worst probably from the point of view of the consumer. And that is why the state may look to regulate monopolies, in which case monopolies will earn normal profit. And often you will find monopolies in things like railroads and so on, but of course they are regulated. The electrical grid, again, a monopoly that's regulated. Of course, there's got to be high barriers to entry. They're very, very capital intense industries, and they're going to be having a lot of pricing power. Okay, so in terms of the picture looks exactly like the picture for monopolistic. Again, I've got marginal cost crossing over marginal revenue, thus giving me my optimal quantity produced. Again, my price is up here, my ATC is down here, and so I can calculate my economic profit as the gray triangle. So that was kind of the picture I showed you for the short run in monopolistic. But here's the key thing, my friends. Here's the key thing. This diagram applies for both the short as well as the long run for monopolies because of the high barriers to entry. Okay, so we cannot come and compete that lovely economic profit of yours. Okay, So let's have a look at the question here, market structures question. A market structure characterized by many sellers, with each having some pricing power. Now that's very important. So I've got some pricing power, but I've got many sellers. Okay. And I've got product differentiation. So lots of little hints here. So let me see if I could work by elimination here. So the obvious one to eliminate here is gonna be Brava. Okay. I want to eliminate Brava because, first of all, I'm not going to have any pricing power. I'm going to be a price taker with a perfectly elastic demand curve. Secondly, I said that the product is commoditized or homogeneous product, so that's not going to work very well at all. So that doesn't sound right to me at all. The other one that I'm tempted to eliminate here is oligopoly. The reason why I would want to eliminate oligopoly is because it just doesn't feel right to have many sellers in oligopoly. So I don't like that one. I feel that the best answer would be monopolistic, and that's because basically all three things, many sellers, tick, some pricing power. Yep, I'm a price setter, downward sloping demand curve. And I've got product differentiation, I've got the brands, I've got the advertising. So it seems like a perfect answer here. Okay, another example, market structure with relatively few sellers. Okay, that should probably be a hint of a homogeneous or standardized product. Homogeneous or standardized product. What am I going to do here, my friends? Okay, this is a little bit tricky because, you might be tempted to say, okay, perfect competition does offer homogeneous products. But again, some of these questions could be a little bit tricky, so you can't just give obvious answers here. So yeah, homogeneous does tempt me to think about perfect. It does tempt me to think about perfect. So let me see if I can eliminate an obviously wrong one. So relatively few sellers probably means not one, right? Few does not mean one. So it's not going to be a monopoly. Now let's look at the other options. You got oligopoly and perfect competition. Now, I know for a fact perfect competition, you don't have relatively few sellers. I mean, this is basically just wrong. You do not have relatively few sellers. So I like to eliminate that, and I like to go for oligopoly. So in this case, the logic is, yes, the product was homogeneous, but still the players had high barriers to entry and there were very few players. So that still is going to be an oligopoly. Okay, concentration measures, aka the pudding after a heavy meal. So we're going to look at a couple of metrics here to understand how competitive or how fragmented our industry is. The first one is the N-firm concentration ratio. So here we're simply adding up the market shares of, let's say, the 5 largest firms in an industry or the 3 largest firms in the industry. Okay, so quick and dirty. That's the advantage, quick and dirty, no funky mathematics involved. The limitations is that, for example, it doesn't really capture the impacts of M&A activity correctly. So for that, we will see the more advanced metric underneath it. And also, it doesn't really understand barriers to entry. Okay, and the second metric is the Herfindahl-Hirschman index, which, by the way, if I recall correctly, is also mentioned at the level 2 syllabus. So you may want to keep an eye out for that one. This one does take, again, the market shares, but first squares them, then adds them up for the n largest firms. So again, be my guest and choose whether you want to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 largest firms, right? But the key thing is take the market share, square them, then add them up, and that's going to give you the Herfindahl-Hirschman ratio. Level 2, I'll teach you basically what a high Herfindahl is. Spoiler alert, mergers are not going to be allowed to occur if the HHI is above 1800 or spot 18. Markets are considered competitive if the HHI is below spot 1 or 1000, and moderately concentrated in between those metrics. But don't worry about this just yet. And then let's have a look here. We are more sensitive to mergers because we are squaring the market shares. Regulators use it, right? So the antitrust division of the DOJ in America uses it. But the limitations again is that it doesn't know about barriers to entry and it doesn't know about elasticity of demand. Okay, so one little example here. An analyst gathers the following market share data for an industry composed of 5 companies: Zeta, Yusuf, Zine, and Waters Lestos. There's the market shares. So these are 5 companies. The industry 3 firm Herfindahl. So notice here they just want the 3 firms. So that's going to be the 3 largest ones. Notice here that HHI sometimes can be computed as the actual percentages squared and then added, or the decimals squared and then added. Obviously, you can see here that they want the latter version. So you're going to decimalize your market shares, and then you're just going to basically add them up like that. Okay, so first square them, then add them up, and you're gonna get spot 225, Alpha Bravo Charlie, Alpha Bravo Charlie. Of course, the answer here is Bravo. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for watching and have a great day. Goodbye.